The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never known silence like this. For 10,000 years, species had come to this room to beg, to bargain, and to bow before the might of the hegemony of 12. The walls themselves seemed built from the weight of history, carved from stone, taken from 100 conquered worlds. Lights floated in the air like captured stars, and the ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the small table assigned to humanity. It was positioned at the far end of the chamber, closest to the doors, furthest from power. This placement was intentional. The hegemony wanted every new species to understand their place from the moment they entered. For 3 months, Elena had sat at this table. She had listened to speeches about humanity's promising but primitive civilization. She had smiled through thinly veiled insults about Earth's quaint technology. She had kept her composure when the Velthari delegate, a being made of living crystal, had suggested that humans might make adequate servants for more advanced species. Her delegation of 12 sat behind her. They were diplomats, military advisors, scientists, and cultural experts. Earth's best and brightest, sent across the stars to secure humanity's future. For 90 days, they had done everything right. They had followed every protocol. They had shown respect even when none was given in return. Today was supposed to be the final day of negotiations. Today, the hegemony would present their terms for humanity's inclusion in galactic civilization. High Arbiter. Zorvan rose from his throne at the center of the chamber. He was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, and his 4 eyes had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations. His gray skin was marked with the ceremonial scars of his office, and when he spoke, translation drones carried his words to every ear in the chamber. The hegemony of 12 has considered humanity's petition, he announced. His voice was deep and slow, each word chosen with the precision of someone who had never been interrupted. We have studied your world. We have examined your history. We have measured your potential. Elena felt her delegation tense behind her. This was the moment they had worked toward. Everything depended on what came next. Our terms are as follows, Zorvan continued. Humanity will be granted protectorate status within the hegemony. In exchange, you will surrender all colonial claims beyond your home system. Your expansion will be limited to pre-approved corridors. Your technology will be subject to review and restriction. A murmur passed through the chamber. These were harsh terms, but not unexpected. Elena had prepared for this. She began composing her counterproposal in her mind. Then Zorvan kept talking. Humanity will submit to cultural guidance from the hegemony's integration office. Your educational systems will be restructured to align with galactic standards. Your media, your art, and your religious practices will be reviewed for compatibility with civilized norms. Elena's jaw tightened. Beside her, General Chen's hand moved toward a tablet. Ready to calculate military options they all knew were hopeless. Finally, Zorvan said, Humanity will provide an annual contribution to the hegemony's labor initiative. 10 million citizens per cycle will be selected for educational integration programs across hegemony space. This service is mandatory and non-negotiable.
Nice.
The chamber fell silent. Elena heard the words, but her mind refused to process them at first. 10 million people, every year, taken from their families and scattered across the galaxy for education. She knew what those programs really were. She knew that the survival rate for integrated species was less than 40%. The hegemony was asking humanity to sell its children into slavery. Elena looked down at her. 3 months of negotiations, proposals, and compromises were stored in its memory. 3 months of hope that the galaxy might have room for humanity as equals. 3 months of believing that patience and diplomacy could overcome fear and prejudice. She closed the datapad and stood up. The movement was small, but in a chamber designed to make lesser species feel insignificant, it drew every eye. Ambassador Vasquez was not a tall woman. She was not physically imposing, but something in the way she rose made the ancient stones seem to lean in and listen. No, she said. The translation drones hesitated. The word was simple enough, but its meaning in this context was so unprecedented that their programming struggled to convey it. High Arbiter Zorvan's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. I do not understand. You wish to negotiate specific terms? No, Elena repeated. We do not accept. We will not accept. These negotiations are over. She turned and walked toward the doors. Behind her, her delegation rose as one and followed. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence like drumbeats. Ambassador Vasquez. Zorvan's voice carried a new edge. You cannot simply leave. The hegemony has not dismissed you. Lena stopped at the threshold. She turned back to face the assembled powers of the galaxy. 40 species watched her, representing civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel when humans were still learning to make fire. Their combined military might could turn Earth into ash in a matter of hours. She should have been afraid. She should have been calculating odds and seeking compromise. Instead, she felt something she had not expected. Clarity. Hi, Arbiter, she said. Humanity came here seeking partnership. We offered friendship, trade, and mutual respect. We were willing to compromise on borders, on technology sharing, on 100 different issues. But we will never, she paused, letting the weight of the word settle, never compromise on the freedom of our people. Admiral! Vorn of the militant ascendancy rose from his seat, his massive form blocking out the lights behind him. You would risk extinction over pride? Alina smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped pretending. We would risk extinction over principle, she said. There is a difference. Your hegemony has spent 10,000 years teaching the galaxy that survival requires submission. Today, humanity teaches a different lesson. She turned back to the doors. What lesson is that? Zorvan demanded. Alina did not look back. That some things matter more than survival. The doors opened before her. The human delegation walked out into the corridor beyond. And then the doors closed with a sound that seemed to echo through the chamber long after the humans had gone. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the delegates began to whisper among themselves. In 10,000 years of galactic politics, no species had ever walked away from the council. Wars had started over smaller insults. Civilizations had been erased for lesser defiance. High Arbiter Zorvan remained motionless on his throne, his 4 eyes fixed on the closed doors. He had negotiated with 1,000 species. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had never, in all his long years, seen anything like what had just happened, and for the first time in centuries, the High Arbiter of the hegemony of 12 felt something he barely recognized: uncertainty. 3 weeks after the humans walked out, Intelligence Director Thiessen received her first incomplete report. In her 40 years of service to the Cathari Dominion, she had never received an incomplete report. Her agents were the finest in the galaxy. They had infiltrated every major power, stolen secrets from the most secure vaults, and predicted the fall of civilizations before the first cracks appeared. Now, they were telling her they could not understand what the humans were doing. Thiessen read the report in her private chamber, surrounded by screens that showed data from 1,000 worlds. Her species resembled what humans might call a praying mantis, though much larger and far more deadly. Her compound eyes could process information faster than most computers. And her mind had been trained since birth to find patterns in chaos. The humans were not behaving like a species, facing extinction. 3 weeks of silence. No diplomatic communications. No requests to resume negotiations. No desperate attempts to find allies among the hegemony's rivals. Human border stations had gone dark, not destroyed, but simply quiet. Their patrols continued, but they made no aggressive moves. Trade vessels that approached human space were politely turned away with expressions of regret and promises of future opportunities. Made no sense. Thiessen called an emergency meeting with High Arbiter Zorvan and the senior members of the Hegemony Council. They gathered in a smaller chamber, away from the ceremonial grandeur of the main hall. Here, the real decisions were made. Here, the masks of diplomacy could be set aside. They are bluffing, declared Fleet Admiral Vorn. His species, the Krath, were bred for war. They had conquered half a dozen star systems before joining the hegemony, and they viewed every problem through the lens of military force. The humans know they cannot win. They are hoping we will offer better terms. And why have they not asked for better terms? Thiessen replied. A bluff only works if you eventually play your hand. The humans are not playing at all. Trade Minister Yellen of the Vel-3 Consortium leaned forward, her crystalline body catching the light. Our merchants report significant disruption to established routes. The humans were minor trading partners, but their absence is being felt. Several hegemony worlds are complaining about supply shortages. Zorvan's 4 eyes narrowed. From a species that controlled barely a dozen systems, the humans were efficient, Yellen admitted. They filled gaps in our supply chains that we did not realize existed. Nothing critical, but uncomfortable. And it will get worse if the situation continues. Thiessen pulled up a holographic display showing human space. 12 systems, tucked into a corner of the galaxy that most species considered unremarkable. Not much territory, not many resources, not much military power. And yet, my agents report unusual activity, she said. The humans are building new shipyards, new orbital stations, new colonies on worlds we considered unsuitable for habitation. They are expanding faster than our models predicted possible. Preparing for war, Vorn said with satisfaction. Good. Let them build their little fleet. When we crush them, the lesson will be that much clearer. That is not what concerns me, Thiessen said. What concerns me is the timeline. She adjusted the display to show construction schedules. Massive projects, hundreds of them, all proceeding simultaneously across human space. These facilities will not be complete for decades. Some will take a century or more. The humans are not preparing for a war that might happen next year. They are building infrastructure for a civilization that expects to exist for thousands of years. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They do not believe we will attack them, Zorvan said slowly. Or they do not care. Worse than that, Thiessen replied. They believe they will survive whatever we do, and they are building accordingly. Admiral Vorn slammed his armored fist on the table. Impossible. We outnumber them 40-1. We could glass their homeworld before they could mount a defense. Could we? Thiessen asked quietly. What do we actually know about human military capabilities? The question hung in the air. The hegemony's intelligence networks were vast, but they had only been observing humanity for a few decades. Before first contact, humans had been dismissed as a minor species, worthy of occasional monitoring, but nothing more. By the time the hegemony realized that humans were expanding faster than expected, there were already gaps in their knowledge. We know enough, Vorn insisted. Their ships are slower than ours. Their weapons are primitive. Their population is a fraction of our combined strength. We know what they have shown us, Thiessen corrected. We know what they chose to reveal during negotiations. We do not know what they have hidden. Zorvan raised a hand for silence. The High Arbiter had been quiet throughout the discussion, his ancient eyes fixed on some distant point. Now he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of millennia. I've ruled this hegemony for 300 years. Before that, I served it for 500 more. I have seen species rise and fall like waves upon a shore. The arrogant are crushed. The weak are absorbed. The clever find a place within our order and survive. We turn to face the others. The humans are none of these things. They walked away from the negotiating table knowing what it would cost them. They are building for a future they have no reason to expect. They are behaving as if our power means nothing to them, and they are fools, Vorn said. Perhaps, Zorvan replied. Or perhaps they know something we do not. He turned to Thiessen. Send more agents. I want to know everything about humanity. Their history. Their culture. Their psychology. I want to know why they smiled when they should have begged. Thiessen bowed her head in acknowledgement, but as she left the chamber, she found herself remembering a report from one of her deep cover agents. A Vel-3 who had spent 6 months living among humans on Earth. The agent had submitted thousands of observations about human society, technology, and military capabilities. But one observation had been flagged as unexplainable. The humans sang while they worked. They sang while building warships that would be used in battles they might not survive. They sang while constructing colony ships for worlds they might never see. They sang at funerals and weddings, at births and deaths. At the beginning of projects that would take generations to complete, Thiessen had dismissed the observation as cultural trivia. Now, she wondered if she had missed something important. The hegemony ruled through fear. It always had. Species joined because they were afraid of being conquered. They stayed because they were afraid of being abandoned. Fear was the foundation upon which 10,000 years of civilization had been built. What happened when a species refused to be afraid? Thiessen did not know the answer, and for the first time in her long career, that uncertainty felt like a warning. The humans were not preparing for war. They were not preparing for peace. They were preparing for something that the hegemony had never encountered before, and they were singing while they did it. The Morvith Collective had survived for 6,000 years by never taking sides. Their hive minds spanned 100 worlds, each one connected to the others through a web of shared consciousness that no outsider truly understood. They traded with everyone. They allied with no one. And they watched, always watched. As empires rose and fell around them, Queen Mind Zeleth had guided her people through 3 major galactic conflicts. She had seen the hegemony absorb a dozen species during her lifetime. She had learned that the safest path was the neutral path, the path that made the collective useful to all sides and threatening to none. But now, for the first time in centuries, she found herself facing a choice she could not avoid. The humans had changed the game. It started small. Morvith merchant ships passing near human space reported unusual activity. Human patrols were escorting their vessels through dangerous regions, protecting them from pirates and raiders who had plagued those routes for generations. When the Morvith captains asked why, humans simply said they were being good neighbors. They asked for nothing in return. This disturbed the collective more than any threat could have. The hegemony's rules were clear. Everything had a price. Protection meant submission. Kindness meant debt. Yet the humans kept escorting Morvith ships, kept clearing pirate bases, kept making the trade routes safer, and they kept asking for nothing. After 6 months of this, Zeleth made a decision that surprised even herself. She requested a private meeting with Ambassador Elena Vesquez. The humans suggested a location, a garden on their newest colony world, a planet called New Eden that should have taken centuries to terraform, but somehow bloomed with life after only decades of human habitation. Zeleth agreed, though she wondered what message the humans were trying to send by choosing such a place. She traveled alone, her consciousness still connected to the collective but contained within a single body for the first time in years. It was a gesture of trust and also of vulnerability. If the humans wanted to harm her, they would never have a better opportunity. Ambassador Vasquez waited in the garden, sitting on a simple stone bench beneath a tree covered in pink blossoms. She wore no formal diplomatic attire, just simple clothing suited to the warm weather. She looked, Zeleth thought, remarkably ordinary for someone who had defied the greatest power in the galaxy. "Thank you for coming," Elena said, rising to greet her guest. "I hope the journey was comfortable. It was acceptable." Zeleth settled her insectoid body onto a larger bench that had been prepared for her. "Your gardens are impressive. This world should not support such life yet," Elena smiled. "Humans are stubborn. We convinced the planet to cooperate." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the blossoms fall. Workers moved through the distant fields, families with children, engineers and farmers building something together. Zeleth could hear them laughing, singing, calling to one another across the rows of growing things. "You did not invite me here to discuss gardening," Zeleth said finally. "No," Elena agreed, "but I wanted you to see this first. I wanted you to understand what we are building." "What is that?" "A future that belongs to us. Not to the hegemony. Not to anyone else. A future we chose for ourselves." Zeleth's compound eyes studied the human ambassador carefully. In 6,000 years, the collective had learned to read the subtle signs of deception in dozens of species. They saw none in Elena Vasquez. The hegemony will not allow this future to exist, Zelith said. They will destroy you before they let you succeed. Perhaps Alina replied. But I do not think so. You believe you can defeat them? With your tiny fleet? Your handful of worlds? No, Alina shook her head. We do not need to defeat them. We only need to outlast them. She turned to face the Queen Mind directly. How old is the hegemony, Your Majesty? 3,000 years? 4. And in that time, how many species have they absorbed? How many civilizations have they erased? Zelith did not answer. The number was large, and it included several species the collective had once called friends. The hegemony survives because everyone believes it is inevitable, Alina continued. Because every species that joins them believes there is no other choice. Because the galaxy has forgotten that empires can fall. Empires do fall, Zelith said slowly. Eventually, but the cost of their falling is measured in billions of lives. Yes, Alina agreed. If you fight them on their terms, if you meet their fleets in battle and try to match their strength, that is the mistake every species has made for 3,000 years. And humans will be different. Alina smiled again, and this time there was something in her expression that made even the ancient Queen Mind feel a chill of recognition. Humans will be patient. She gestured toward the colonists working in the fields. Do you see those people? They are planting trees that will not bear fruit for 20 years. They are building roads for cities that do not exist yet. They are writing songs that their grandchildren will sing. We do not measure time the way other species do, Alina said. A human life is short by galactic standards, barely a century if we are lucky. But we build for generations. We plant seeds knowing we will never see the harvest. We start projects that our children will finish and our grandchildren will improve. Zelith felt something shift in her understanding. You are not preparing for a war that will happen soon. No. We are preparing for a world that will exist long after this conflict is forgotten. Alina leaned forward. The hegemony thinks in terms of conquest and submission. They count ships and weapons and territory, but they have forgotten how to count years. Ow. And you believe they will simply fall apart while you wait? I believe they are already falling apart, Alina said quietly. The hegemony is not a unified civilization. It is a collection of frightened species clinging together because they fear being alone. Fear is a powerful force, but it is brittle. It does not inspire loyalty. It does not create love. It does not build gardens like this one. She stood and walked among the falling blossoms. We walked away from the negotiating table because we realized something important. We do not need the hegemony. We never did. Every species they have conquered believed they had no choice. We simply chose to believe otherwise. Zelith was silent for a long moment, processing this information through the vast network of minds that comprised the collective. Millions of voices debated, analyzed, calculated, and slowly a consensus began to form. The Morvith collective has survived by remaining neutral, she said finally. By being useful to all sides and threatening to none. I understand, Alina said. I am not asking you to join us. I am not asking you to fight. I am only asking you to consider a possibility that you may have forgotten existed. What possibility is that? Alina turned back to face her. That you have a choice. That neutrality is not the only path to survival. That the hegemony's rules are not the only rules. She extended her hand, a human gesture that the collective had studied but never quite understood. The Morveth had been watching the galaxy for 6,000 years. In all that time, have you ever seen a species refuse to play the game at all? Zelith looked at the offered hand. She thought about the escorts for Morvith's ships, the cleared trade routes, the kindness without price. She thought about what it might mean to make a choice not based on fear. Slowly, carefully, she extended one of her own limbs and touched the human ambassador's hand. No, she admitted. We have never seen anything like you, Lena smiled. Then perhaps it is time to imagine something new. The first affection came quietly, like a stone dropped into still water. The Morvith Collective announced that they were establishing independent diplomatic relations with humanity. They were not leaving the hegemony, they explained. They were simply exploring new opportunities. No one believed them. Within days, the ripples began to spread. The Ythrani Federation, ancient enemies of the Ketheri Dominion, sent a delegation to human space. They returned with trade agreements and defensive treaties that made the hegemony's intelligence services scramble to understand. Then the agricultural worlds of the Outer Rim, long neglected by the core powers, began making their own arrangements. With human merchants who offered fair prices and treated their workers with respect, High Arbiter Zorvan called an emergency session of the Hegemony Council. The chamber that had once intimidated Ambassador Vasquez was now filled with fear of a different kind. Representatives shouted over each other, demanding explanations, assigning blame, proposing solutions that ranged from immediate military action to desperate appeasement. Intelligence. Director Thiessen stood silent in the chaos, watching the oldest alliance in galactic history begin to crack. This is treason. Fleet Admiral Vorn roared, his massive form towering over the other delegates. The Morvith must be punished. We should blockade their systems until they remember their obligations. And what of the Ythrani? Trade Minister Yellen countered. In the Outer Rim colonies? Shall we blockade half the galaxy? If necessary. With what ships? Thiessen spoke quietly, but her voice cut through the noise. Every species that leaves takes their fleet with them. The Morvith contributed 200 warships to our combined forces. The Ythrani, 300 more. If the Outer Rim colonies follow, we lose access to the shipyards that build a quarter of our vessels. Vorn turned on her, his eyes blazing. Then we attack now, before more can leave. Attack whom? The humans have not fired a shot. They have not threatened anyone. They have simply offered alternatives. Thiessen pulled up a holographic display showing the changing political map. We cannot declare war on a species that has done nothing but be helpful. The neutral powers would turn against us. Even our own members would question the justice of such action. Justice. Vorn laughed bitterly. Since when does the hegemony concern itself with justice? Since the humans made it relevant again? The chamber fell silent. Thiessen walked to the center of the room, her insectoid form casting strange shadows in the floating lights. I have spent the past year studying humanity, she said. I have read their history. I have analyzed their psychology. I have tried to understand why they refused to surrender when surrender was the only logical choice. Choosing her words carefully, the humans have a concept they call soft power. It means influence without force, persuasion without threats. The ability to shape events not by controlling others, but by inspiring them to choose differently. She turned to face Zorvan directly. The hegemony is always ruled through fear. Fear of conquest. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being alone in a hostile universe. But fear is not loyalty. Fear does not inspire sacrifice. Fear does not make species want to stay. The humans offered something we have never offered, she continued. Choice. Real choice. The Morvith did not leave because they were threatened. They left because they were given an alternative they found more appealing. The Ythrani did not rebel. They simply decided that partnership with humans was better than submission to us. Trade Minister Yellen leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Director? That we cannot compete with human kindness? I am suggesting that we have forgotten how to try. Thiessen pulled up more data. Look at our trade agreements. Look at our protection treaties. Look at how we treat our member species. Every relationship is based on what they must give us, not what we give them. Every alliance is held together by the threat of what happens if they leave. Gosh. She gestured at the empty seats around the chamber, representatives who had quietly stopped attending sessions. The humans did not steal our allies. They simply reminded them that they had options. And when given options, many chose to leave. Admiral Vorn slammed his fist on his console. Then we remove the option. We crush the humans and show the galaxy what happens to those who defy us. And then what? Thiessen asked. We prove that the only way to keep species loyal is through violence. We confirm every fear that drove them to seek alternatives in the first place. She turned to the wider chamber. I have studied human history extensively. Do you know what I found most remarkable? Not their technology or their military tactics. Not their art or their science. What I found remarkable was their persistence. Humans have been conquered many times. By other humans, by circumstances, by forces far greater than themselves. And every single time, they survived. They adapted. They endured. And eventually, they overcame. They call it hope, she said quietly. The belief that things can get better. The willingness to suffer in the present for a future they may never see. It is irrational by our standards. It makes no logical sense. But it is the most dangerous force I have ever encountered. High Arbiter, Zorvan, had been silent throughout the discussion. Now he raised one ancient hand, and the chamber fell silent. "We're saying we cannot defeat them," he said. It was not a question. "I'm saying that defeating them may not matter," Thiessen replied. "Even if we destroy every human world, burn every colony, kill every last member of their species, the idea they represent will survive. Others have already seen what is possible. Others have already begun to hope." She pulled up one final image, a map of the galaxy showing every species that had established independent relations with humanity in the past year. The number was far larger than anyone in the chamber had realized. "The humans did not start a war," Thiessen said. "They started a revolution. And revolutions cannot be defeated with fleets." The chamber erupted again, but this time the shouting had a different quality. Beneath the anger and the fear, there was something new. Something that looked almost like acceptance. Because deep down, every species in that room had felt the weight of the hegemony's demands. Deep down, they all remembered what it was like to make choices based on fear rather than hope. And deep down, they all wondered what it might be like to be free. The humans had not conquered anyone. They had not threatened anyone. They had simply shown the galaxy that another path existed, and the galaxy, slowly but surely, was beginning to walk it. Thiessen watched the chaos unfold around her and felt something she had not expected. Not despair. Not anger. Something closer to relief. Perhaps, she thought. It was finally time for something new. 1 year after she walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked back in. The room looked different now. Half the seats were empty, their former occupants having joined what the galaxy now called the Coalition of Free Worlds. The floating lights seemed dimmer somehow, as if they sensed that the power they had witnessed for 10,000 years was finally fading. The walls still bore the stones of 100 conquered worlds, but now those stones felt more like tombstones than trophies. High Arbiter Zorvan sat on his throne at the center of the chamber, but he was no longer the imposing figure he had been. His 4 eyes were clouded with age and exhaustion. His gray skin had lost its ceremonial luster. He looked, Alina thought, like someone who had lived long enough to see everything he had built begin to crumble. The remaining hegemony delegates watched her enter with a mixture of fear and hostility. Fleet Admiral Vorn was still there, though his faction had lost most of its ships to defection. Trade Minister Yellen sat rigid in her crystalline form, her people's economy devastated by the loss of trading partners who now preferred human merchants. Intelligence Director Thiessen was notably absent. Having quietly requested asylum in human space 2 months earlier, Alina walked to the center of the chamber. Not to the small table near the doors where humanity had once been placed, but to the open space reserved for equals. No one objected. There was no one left who could have come to gloat, Zorvan said. His voice was still deep, but it had lost its power to intimidate. "No," Alina replied. She sat down, not on a throne or a position of honor, but on a simple chair that her delegation had brought with them. A human chair, unremarkable and ordinary. "I've come to finish what we started a year ago." She placed a small data chip on the floor in front of her. "These are our terms for peace." Admiral Vorn made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Peace. You have destroyed us without firing a shot. You have stolen half our alliance. You have humiliated us before the entire galaxy. And now you offer peace?" "Yes," Alina said simply. "That is exactly what we offer." She gestured to the data chip. "Equal partnership between the hegemony and the coalition." Open borders for trade and travel. Mutual defense agreements based on genuine cooperation, not forced submission. No tribute. No cultural guidance programs. No labor initiatives. Just two civilizations working together as equals. The chamber was silent. Even Vorn seemed too stunned to respond. Why? Zorvan asked finally. You have one. The hegemony is broken. Why offer terms at all? Why not simply wait for us to collapse completely? Alina was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Through the chamber's great windows, she could see the lights of the Council's orbital stations, the ships that still bore the hegemony's markings, the last remnants of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, because that was never what we wanted, she said. She stood and walked closer to the High Arbiter's throne. The guards who had once protected him were gone, reassigned to more critical duties. There was nothing between Alina and the ancient leader of the hegemony but empty air and years of mistrust. A year ago, I sat at that small table by the door and listened to your terms, she said. You offered us survival at the cost of our freedom. You offered us protection at the cost of our children. You offered us a place in your empire at the cost of everything that made us human, and you refused, Zorvan said. We refused. But not because we hated you, not because we wanted to destroy you. We refused because we knew that the galaxy deserved better than fear. She turned to face the remaining delegates. Look around this chamber. Look at the empty seats. Look at the species who chose to leave when they realized they had a choice. Do you understand what that means? No one answered, but Alina continued anyway. It means the hegemony was never as strong as it believed. It was held together by the absence of alternatives, not by the presence of loyalty. When we offered something different, species chose it. Not because we forced them. Not because we threatened them. Simply because they wanted something better. She returned to her chair and sat down again. Humanity could have waited. We could have let the hegemony continue to crumble. We could have watched from a distance while your alliance fell apart completely. Some of my advisors thought we should do exactly that, but we did not become who we are by seeking the destruction of others. We did not reach the stars by tearing down everyone around us. We built, we created. We hoped, and we want to continue hoping, even for former enemies. Zorvan's 4 eyes studied her carefully. In 300 years of rule, he had negotiated with countless species. He had learned to recognize lies, to identify manipulation, to see through diplomatic masks. But in the human ambassador's face, he found only sincerity. You truly believe this is possible, he said slowly. Peace between species that have been enemies for a year. Cooperation between civilizations that fundamentally disagree about how the galaxy should work. I believe it is worth trying, Alina replied. I believe that the galaxy is large enough for many different ways of living. I believe that strength does not require domination and that survival does not require submission.
Oh.
She smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. And I believe that 3,000 years is long enough to live in fear. Perhaps it is time to try something else. Admiral Vorn rose from his seat, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. And if we refuse? If we reject your terms and choose to fight until the last ship, the last world, the last soldier? Alina met his gaze without flinching. Then we will defend ourselves. We will protect our allies. We will continue to build and hope and survive. And one day, perhaps centuries from now, your children's children will wonder why their ancestors chose pride over peace. She stood and walked toward the chamber's exit. Her delegation fell in behind her just as they had a year ago. But this time, she paused at the threshold and looked back. The doors are open, she said. They always have been. We are not here to conquer you or destroy you. We are here to invite you to imagine something different. She gestured at the data chip still sitting on the floor. In your time, consider our offer. Ask yourselves what kind of future you want to build. We will be here when you are ready. She turned and walked through the doors, leaving them open behind her. An invitation, not a rejection. A hand extended, not a fist raised. High Arbiter Zorvan sat motionless on his throne for a long time after the humans left. Around him, the remaining delegates whispered among themselves, debating, arguing, trying to understand what had just happened. Finally, slowly, Zorvan rose from his throne. He walked across the chamber, his ancient body protesting every step, until he stood before the data chip that Elena had left behind. He bent down and picked it up. "Arrange a formal session," he said quietly. "Notify all remaining members. We have terms to discuss. It's somewhere in the galaxy. On a garden world covered in cherry blossoms. A human ambassador." Received word that the doors she had walked through were finally being kept open, not because the hegemony had surrendered, not because they had been forced, but because for the first time in 3,000 years, they had been offered something better than fear. They had been offered hope, and sometimes, hope was all it took to change everything.